The air inside the grand concert hall felt heavy, like the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on the polished wooden floor. It was one of those prestigious events where the chandeliers cost more than most people's houses, and the audience sat in velvet seats, sipping expensive champagne and whispering behind their programs. Everyone was there for the annual Young Virtuosos competition, an event known for making or breaking careers overnight. But tonight, the vibe in the room wasn't just excitement, it was thick with judgment. At the center of it all was the judging panel. They sat behind a long, draped table, looking like a row of serious owls. The head judge, a man with silver hair and a nose that looked as if he had spent his entire life looking down on people, was particularly restless. He had seen hundreds of pianists that day, and frankly, he was bored. He wanted to go home. He wanted to hear something shocking, or he wanted to leave. Then, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, calling out the next contestant. A young woman walked out from the side curtains. Her name was Anya. She didn't look like the other performers. The others had worn shimmering gowns or sharp tuxedos, hair perfectly styled, shoes gleaming. Anya wore a simple dress that looked like it had been bought from a second-hand store years ago. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore flat shoes that made no sound on the stage. As she walked toward the grand piano in the center of the spotlight, a low murmur rippled through the crowd. It wasn't a cheer. It was the sound of confusion and prejudice. People leaned toward each other, cupping their hands over their mouths to whisper. "Who is she?" someone asked. "Is she a tuner?" another person joked. It was cruel, the kind of casual cruelty that happens in wealthy rooms when someone different walks in. They assumed she was a cleaner, or perhaps a student who had gotten lost on her way to the cafeteria. They certainly didn't think she was a competitor. Anya didn't look at the audience. She kept her eyes forward, her face calm and still. She felt the tension in the air, of course. It was impossible not to. She could feel the judgment bouncing off the walls. But she didn't blush, and she didn't stumble. She just walked with a quiet dignity, carrying nothing but a small, worn-out sheet of paper in her hand. When she reached the piano, she stood quietly, waiting for the signal to begin. The head judge sighed loudly, making sure everyone heard his annoyance. He didn't even look at her face, he just stared at her simple shoes. He whispered something to the judge next to him, a woman with huge diamond earrings, and she let out a sharp, mean laugh. Then, the head judge decided to have his fun. He leaned into his microphone, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "We see you have chosen your own piece," he said, pausing for effect. "This is unusual for the stage of the competition. But please, do go on, show us what you have." He hadn't asked her to play because he wanted to hear music. He asked her to play because he wanted to embarrass her. He expected it to be terrible. He wanted the audience to laugh so he could move on to the next person. Anya nodded once, a small, polite movement. She walked over to the piano bench and sat down. The bench was old and squeaked slightly under her weight. She adjusted her posture, taking a moment to smooth out her skirt. The audience rustled their programs, checking their watches, mentally checking out. They were already bored. They thought the show had hit a low point. Anya placed her hands on the keys. They were cold to the touch. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the dusty air of the hall. She knew exactly what they were thinking. She knew they saw her clothes, her lack of glamour, and they had written her off. They saw a nobody. They saw a joke. And that was exactly what she wanted them to see. In her mind, She was calm. She had spent years preparing for moments like this, moments where she was underestimated. She had learned that people like the judges in front of her only understood the language of power. They didn't respect humility, they respected shock. They didn't respect the underdog until the underdog bit back. The head judge tapped his pen on the table, a rhythmic, impatient sound. He was signaling for her to hurry up. He couldn't wait for her to play a few wrong notes so he could buzz her off the stage. Anya looked down at the keyboard. It was a vast landscape of black and white. To her, it wasn't just an instrument, it was a weapon. She thought about the piece she was about to play. It was a song everyone knew, a simple, childish tune that most children learned in their first month of lessons. It was the piece the judges had expected her to play when they saw her simple demeanor, something basic, something easy. She lifted her hands slightly. The room went silent. Even the whisperers stopped talking for a moment, waiting to see what kind of noise this strange girl would make. Anya closed her eyes for a split second, blocking out the chandeliers, the expensive suits, and the sneering faces. She found the center of herself, that quiet place where the music lived. She was about to give them exactly what they expected. She was going to play the simple tune. She was going to play it badly, deliberately, with a robotic, flat rhythm that would confirm their worst prejudices. She would let them feel superior. She would let them smirk. She would play the fool so perfectly that they would never see it coming when the game changed. With a steady hand, Anya struck the first key. It was a single, hollow note that echoed through the large hall. It wasn't beautiful. It was dull. The head judge smirked, his prediction coming true. He sat back, ready to endure a minute of torture before waving his hand to stop her. Anya began to play the melody, her fingers moving stiffly, mechanically. The audience groaned internally. They had seen enough. They were already waiting for the next contestant. The mockery was complete. She was exactly what they thought she was, untalented, ordinary, and out of her depth. Or so they believed. The sound that came out of the grand piano wasn't music, at least not in the way this elite audience understood it. It was a series of heavy, disconnected notes that plunked into the silence like stones dropping into a puddle. Anya was playing a melody that every single person in the room had heard 1,000 times before. It was the kind of tune used to teach toddlers where middle C was a nursery rhyme, a childish lullaby. She played it slowly, painfully slowly. Her fingers pressed the keys with a heavy thud instead of a light touch. There was no softness, no rhythm, and absolutely no soul. It was the sound of a clock ticking, but broken and lagging behind time. Almost immediately, the vibe in the room shifted from judgmental to outright bored. The people in the expensive velvet seats started shifting their weight, the fabric squeaking under them as they turned away from the stage. The air of excitement that usually crackled before a big performance had evaporated instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating fog of disappointment. You could practically see the thought bubbles forming over everyone's heads. Is this a joke? Why did they let her on stage? I need a drink. A woman in the front row, wearing a necklace that looked heavy enough to break her neck, actually let out a loud, audible sigh. She pulled a small mirror out of her purse and began checking her lipstick, completely ignoring the girl at the piano. It was a brutal display of indifference. To her, and to most of the crowd, Anya had become invisible. She was just a nuisance, a delay between the intermission and the real talent. The judges were having a field day, though they did it silently. The head judge leaned back in his chair, a smug, tight smile creeping across his face. He didn't even bother to look at his scoring sheet, he just stared at the ceiling, his fingers tapping impatiently on the table. He felt like he had won. His prejudice was right. This girl in the cheap dress wasn't a hidden gem, she was just an amateur who didn't know her place. He glanced at the judge next to him, raising an eyebrow as if to say, "Can you believe this?" The other judge nodded back, exchanging a look of pity mixed with superiority. They weren't judging a performance anymore, they were judging a failure, and it made them feel powerful to watch it. High up in the balcony, a young boy sat with his parents. He had saved his allowance for months to buy a ticket because he loved the piano more than anything. When Anya first walked out, he had felt hopeful. He liked her simple dress. He thought she looked like a real person, not a polished statue. But as she played, his heart sank. He cringed in his seat. He knew the song she was playing, he had learned it 5 years ago. He heard the hesitation in her fingers, the lack of rhythm, the awkward pauses. He leaned his head on his mother's shoulder, feeling embarrassed for her. "Why is she doing that?" he whispered, his voice tied with confusion. "She's messing it up." His mother shushed him gently, but he couldn't watch. He closed his eyes, wishing the ground would open up and swallow the stage. Anya wasn't just fooling the judges, she was breaking the hearts of the dreamers in the crowd who wanted to see magic but were seeing a train wreck instead. But if anyone had looked closely, really closely at Anya's hands, they might have noticed something strange. While the music sounded clumsy and stiff, her hands were actually quite relaxed. She wasn't playing badly because she didn't know how, she was playing badly because she was controlling every single aspect of the sound to make it seem that way. It takes a lot of control to play a piano quietly and evenly without slipping up, and she was doing